Okay, let me just go back just in terms of the, I hope I'm audible, just in terms of the overall findings and our general impressions about it. Just again to say that we found that there were quite systematic and structural challenges, which have continued, I think, despite numerous reports and assessments that have actually been conducted, and the general lack of appreciation of the potential that these Tusong service centers have in terms of service delivery mechanism, and the fact that generally they are not a priority from the sense that we got from the assessment that we undertook, and as a result, they have not really been effective and functional, and for the objective for which they were established in 1999. And one of the things that we also found was, I think there was a lack of clarity and at worst confusion in terms of the roles, who was responsible for the oversight, who was responsible for coordination, and who was responsible for the ownership, basically as well. And one of the things that I was alluding to is our experience when we went to Tombo, Tusong Center in our Tambo, which is in Port St. John's. And there was the situation there was very dire. We experienced the same sense when we went to Kunu, Tusong Center, which was really a big structure, but that was just basically non-functional. When we went to Tombo, the post office had just closed the previous day. In Kunu, essentially there is no service. I think there is only an early childhood development center that is operating, and the rest of the departments are really not functional. There are no departments, and there is a dire need for government services in that center, but really the center is not really being supported. In our interactions with the stakeholders and role players, people told us that there was a lack of clarity and confusion as to the roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders, both nationally, provincially, the role of the district municipality, the role of the local municipalities. So there are issues around horizontal and vertical roles and responsibility and relationships that I think we need to address as part of this discussion and dialogue. And one of the things that we are saying that as part of something to consider is to really define the role of various players like DPSA, GCIS, COCTA, and DPME in terms of this. And also the roles of districts, the local municipalities, the province, sector departments that are very critical in providing those services, using the Tusong Center as a vehicle for that, and also other service delivery entities like the post office, SASA, etc. So we need really to define the issues about roles and responsibilities, who is responsible for oversight, who is responsible for coordination, and who has the ultimate responsibility for ownership to ensure that these centers are effective and actually functional. So in our findings, essentially we're saying that there are two fundamental systemic and structural key findings, and of which the rest of the issues that you are raising are just a function of. One is around the issue of the legislative and policy framework, which I think is very important that as part of this dialogue, we need to have a discussion on, in terms of holding certain people and institutions accountable and responsible for the functioning and the performance of these Tusong centers. I think that is very, very critical. That policy framework that basically will define those issues around responsibility and accountability. I think the second one, which I think is very critical, that we sort of, is perhaps the narrow conceptualization in the framing of access issues. In a sense, and what we heard in terms of, I think we're looking at Tusong centers and almost as a magic bullet, in terms of addressing service delivery issues. So as a result of this, we've identified the following weaknesses, like there's a lack of implementation of past recommendations. We've discovered that there have been no less than 7 reports, that have been undertaken over the past decade, assessing the effectiveness and the efficiency of the Tusong centers. There are no minimum norms and standards. When we went to Tusong centers in our Tambo and the ones that we also went to in Waterberg district, we really find that there's a lot of variation, in terms of what to find when you go to Tusong centers. There seems not to be a universal and a standard norms and standard in terms of what is it that you basically expect when you walk into the Tusong centers. I mean, one of the things that we observe, in some of them, there was just no signage, basically, in terms of something that will basically be directing, communities and other people to say that, these are Tusong centers. So no minimum norms and standards, and I think that's something to think about especially by departments that are responsible for setting up those standards. And we know that in terms of the Public Administration and Management Act, there's an obligation on the part, of the DPSA to ensure that those things are in place. I think the issue about ICT and connectivity has been alluded. I'm not going to go into that. There are basic elementary things like just working tools, that people have no access to, and there is no sense of how to deal with customers or with citizens when they come to the centers. I think in one instance, for example, one of the focal point from one of the district municipality who is responsible for coordinating the various Tusong centers was actually using her own computer, a laptop, and also a cell phone, to do the business of coordinating the work of the center. That support was not actually provided. No working tools. I think Deputy Minister alluded to that issue about working tools. So we need to really to address some of those things, but there's a general poor state of ICT, when you go to these to the strong centers. There is no coordination. There's poor coordination and integration between service department. The issue about silo operation and culture. In some cases, you'll find that there will be social development. In other Tusong center, there will be the Department of Agriculture. So there's a lot of variation, basically, in terms of, and the center managers find themselves, at the receiving end. They are caught, between the rock and the hard place, in terms of their roles and responsibilities. So there is no standard way to say that in a Tusong centers, these are the minimum kinds of services that you should actually be expecting. There's a lot of variation across the board. One of the things that we've also realized is that I think there's a lack of leveraging of the potential of public-private partnerships and building on what already exists. Now, there are two cases where this probably is quite very interesting. In the case of Kunu, for instance, I think the big structure, the Tusong Center that was set up, it was actually, I think, constructed by one of the biggest private sector companies. And one of the things that some of the communities were talking to and some of the stakeholders to say that perhaps we need to turn this place into a skills development center by the nature of the magnitude and the scale of the building and the potential that it has. So we need to try and explore leveraging public-private partnerships. And when we're having a discussion and interaction with them, for example, to say what is the extent of the involvement of the Department of Labor, and there was no idea, no sense of whether the Department of Labor was actually involved in terms of some of the ideas that communities has about what these Tusong centers could actually be. In the case of Waterberg, for example, Northern Mining Company has actually developed a very nice and a good building in Northern, but that building is actually not being used. It could be a potential building that can be explored, as a Tusong center mobile. So I think it's very important to leverage public-private partnerships, but also not public-private partnerships, but also working with civil society organizations as well that can come to these centers and actually provide services that communities actually required. The state of the infrastructure is very bad and is dilapidated as unsafe. And especially I think in Waterberg, I think in the two Tusong centers we visited, basically there was no water. There was no water, there was no electricity, and I think in Valvat, near La Palele, where we went to, as part of the Mudimbuli municipality, there had been a service delivery protest, I think 2 weeks ago. The windows were actually broken, and the center manager had told us that he had done all the required processes in terms of getting quotation to repair the Tusong centers, but for close to a month now, nothing had been done, basically. So the windows were basically broken. We actually went there again, I think 3 or 4 weeks again. We found the same state of affairs was still in place. So I think the issue about the infrastructure in these centers is actually, and the question is, what is the role, of the municipality? What is the role of the district? What is the role of the Department of Public Works in that particular case? What is the role of the Department of Water Affairs when there is no water? What is the role of ESCOM when there is no electricity for about a month in a Tusong center, where you expect people to be serviced? So I think those are some of the things that we really need to basically to consider. So what we've actually done in terms of our assessment, we've sort of have what we, in terms of our recommendation, basically, just to say that there are short-term things that we need to consider, and there are medium-term things that we need to consider, and there are long-term things that we need to consider. And I think in the short-term, I think this discussion that we're having now, I think is part of that short-term intervention to say that what is it that we can actually basically sort of do. This dialogue, I think, is something that we need to resolve the issue about the legislative framework and the policy issues that actually govern the operation of these centers. I think the issues about the governance general of these Tusong centers, I think there needs to be a bit of clarity and the capacity building of center managers. We actually find that capacity varies across the board. in terms of what are the minimum, what is the general job description of a center manager, for instance, and what are the minimum capacity requirements that you need for both center managers, but also for departments that are actually rendering services in those two song centers. So I think those are some of the things that we can think about basically in the short term. In the medium term, I think there are big issues about the reconfiguration and the rethinking about and reimagining these two song centers differently. The issue of, I think, digitization and modernization, I think it was alluded to. I think it's something that we need to think about. How do we begin, to look into that, as a medium-term intervention? But also the issue of leveraging public-private partnerships. I mean, one of the things that we did when we do an analysis, we actually realized that if you look at the scale of what already exists in terms of private sector capacity, in terms of retail services, why can't we explore leveraging those things instead of just preoccupying ourselves with a brick and mortar situation because it's going to take years to actually to rebuild and to resuscitate these two song centers. In the country, you've got about 4,600 petrol filling stations. You have about 2,350 PEP retail branches, which offer a whole range of services. Nowadays, I think you can actually you can go to PEP to courier services. Why don't we basically leverage on what already exists in terms of capability within the private sector, within the retail space, for example, where a lot of people actually go on a day-to-day basis. For commercial services. And I think the whole thing about the framework, about, feasibility in terms of a business case for these two song centers, I think we need to explore that. And one of the things that we also sort of realized that it might be useful, there were specific dire situations that we came across in Tombo, I think, at Tambo, I think in Mapela, two song center in Waterberg, which actually serves. That Tusong Center is supposed to be serving, I think, about over 40 villages, essentially, but where there's just basically no infrastructure, basically. Why don't we, as government, together with other role players in the private sector and other international organizations, come together and to say that we're going to take one or two areas or areas and where we are going to actually to develop a flagship of a Tusong Centers, come up with a proof of concept to demonstrate how this thing can actually work. Something like that. So I think those are some of the things that we really need to think outside the box, in terms of pushing and making these two song centers. And I think in the long term, I think something that was, mentioned by the Public Service Commission, by other panelists, I think the whole thing about institutional performance, monitoring and evaluation of these centers actually is very, very critical. Ongoing monitoring and evaluation, and to think about what would be the role of the Public Service Commission to continue to do this citizen satisfaction survey and the review of the model. I think as officials, we reflect on these things quite a lot. We're here today in this dialogue, we're talking about them, but it's very important to begin to get the voice of the citizens in terms of what is it that people, what kind of services do people want, and that will really assist us to frame the kind of two-song center model that we actually want to see going forward. And this is just one of the examples, for example, that we are basically saying that we really need to. I know that there is an access strategy, that exists at national level, and we really need to think about what we call an integrated multi-channel access to public goods and services. Yes, there will be a bricks and mortar model, which will be in the form of physical structure, like the two-song centers, but also we need to leverage on public-private partnerships on the retail sector, to say that what exists in the retail space that we can actually use, because the issue is about delivering services to the people, and two-song centers are just but one mechanism, but there may be other mechanisms as well. We need to explore ICT channels like the use of mobile phones, use of WhatsApp and SMSs. We know, for example, that I think there's GovChat. Have we really made the most use of those capacity in terms of online channels, for example? So we need to look into that. Mobile services and other things like mobile services, basically vans, trucks, and really going out to communities instead of communities coming to these centers to receive services. We really need to think about it. And also look at other intangible basically channels, especially around the issues about the use of language, for example, and also catering for the needs of the vulnerable groups, basically as well. So I think what we're trying to do here is to say that let's really think just beyond the Tusong Service Center in terms of the bricks and mortar as a physical structure, but let's begin to explore other mechanisms. Because at the end of the day, the issue is about bringing services closer to the people, and this may be through physical means, but it could be through other channels that actually already exist within the public service and within society. Just in terms of, in conclusion, just in terms of the critical success factors, I think the issue of the political will was raised before. It's very, very critical, and there needs to be a general buy-in and support, basically, amongst the within government itself, but also within the private sector, but also within the civil society space as well. I think we really need to programmatize this reimagination of the Tusong centers. I think what actually exists at the moment, our own assessment is that there's a lot of policy frameworks in terms of what needs to happen and everything else, but it only ends there. There is no sort of systematic and sort of deliberate attempt to really to say that what is it that we are going to do, how are we going to deal with the issues of ownership, coordination, and issues of funding, etc., etc. So I think we need, as government, to begin to think about programmatizing some of all of these things that we're saying we have in place to try and turn the situation around. The issue of budgeting and funding has come up quite consistently, and I think we need to explore the issue about refinancing and special appropriations, that are really going to be, to say that for the next 2 to 3 years, or in the next medium-term period, this is how much government, together with other partners, is going to invest in trying to really to turn around these Tusong centers. I think we need to be very deliberate and we need to be very brave in terms of how we want to do that. But also in terms of budgeting, is about dealing with the issues of infrastructure, the basic infrastructure issues that I've alluded before, water, electricity, and just maintenance and repairs. And I think here we really have to think about what will be the role of ESCOM in terms of issues of electricity. What's the role of the Department of Water Affairs for water provision? What is the role of Department of Public Works in terms of the general maintenance of the buildings themselves, basically? Because in some cases we found that, I think it was in Waterberg, for example, I think the only time that the buildings, were maintained or whatever was when the buildings or the Tusong centers were opened, I think by Premier Ngwago Ramatloti, who was the premier then, and Minister Esopa Hart, who was the minister and the president. This is a long time ago, essentially. And you actually could really, from the outside or from the inside, you can just see that the building has not really been maintained. So I think we need to think about, and I think we're here today together to think about what is the role, because I think this really goes beyond the stakeholders that are just in this dialogue today. I think the issue about empowerment as well of the staff is very critical, because we're interacting with a lot of officials from the district municipalities, and we really need to start to explore how we can basically empower them, empowering the center managers, because they are caught between the rock and the hard place in terms of some of them are employed by the municipality, some of them are employed by the district municipality, some are employed by the province. So there is no uniformity in terms of the roles and responsibility of these people, and there is no concerted program to build their capacity, basically. So we really need to explore things like, have a forum of center managers, knowledge exchange, building their capacity on issues of customer relations management, how to manage and how to manage various stakeholders across the sectors. The issue about lack of standardization in terms of job descriptions of these center managers and empowering them is actually something that is actually very, very very critical. I think the investment in ICT, I think is something that I think we've actually alluded to. I think there's been a lot of discussion about we need to explore things like Wi-Fi and internet access, in these particular areas. But I think critical for us is the issue about beyond bricks and mortar, basically, to say that I think let's explore other things like mobile services. And also I think we move beyond just the one-size-fits-all approach to say that one Tusong center in Tombo is not probably going to be, it is not going to take the same nature and form like the Maponya Mall Tusong Center. So I think we need to actually have, and I think that's why one of our recommendations that we need to explore almost coming up with a flagship, and a proof of concept in terms of how do you really make a Tusong Center operate, in a far-flung area, but that is actually servicing a large number of people. I think one of the things around the differentiation, and it's something that we realize that it probably hasn't happened, or if it did happen, it happened a long time ago. Doing a geospatial analysis, for instance, in terms of how many citizens actually live in a particular area, you'll find that maybe the majority of them are young people. So if it's young people, then it actually follows that. Perhaps what you need there, a lot of effort should be actually be invested in things like skills development centers, investing in ICT, and digital infrastructure. If it's like it's elderly, unemployed people, you might actually find that you need to have services that really address social issues that actually fail. So I think the need to do a geospatial analysis in terms of what you need in a particular geographic area where you want to put the Tusong Service Center, I think is something that we really need to explore. And I think the issue of leveraging public-private partnerships, but also leveraging working with civil society, I think is something that is also basically critical. And I think I will basically end the program director and thanks for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Bongani, for the presentation. And I think with the next presentation that is coming, Veronica Murtalane, I hope you'll respond to some of the issues that are coming through from the UNDP assessment. Carmen, you were right. What you said could have happened last week. And as Bongani says now, the assessment that you did was in June this year. And yes, you're correct. There was no need for the Public Service Commission to do another assessment when things have not changed. We do appreciate provinces that have made strides, but we still have those that are still challenged in terms of making sure that the service centers are working properly. We will now take the next presentation from Veronica Murtalane. She's the Chief Director for Service Access at DPSA. I heard Bongani talking about the access strategy. That was during our time at DPSA. I think it was around 2005 or so when we were talking about access strategy. I remember when I started working at DPSA in 2005, one of the first meetings that I attended was to discuss the MPPCs with, it was not COCTA then, what was it called? But local government. And we were talking about the very same issues way back then. We hope the next presentation by Veronica will then shed light on some of the issues that were raised by some of the previous speakers and continue to give us hope that things will be better. Veronica, over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, the DM in absentia, Prof. Somadoda, as well as my fellow presenters, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to take this opportunity to wish you a happy Public Service Month. I hope you are enjoying it, and there are lots of lessons that are coming out of that. And we will be looking forward as public servants to basically make sure that we implement whatever lessons that are coming from this kind of dialogue. Indeed, Program Director, there has been some discussions around the Tucson service centers. There has been some discussions around basically implementation of Patupili in principles in generally, the policy. And there continue to be some lessons in that regard. So what I think, part of the discussions or dialogue of this nature should actually, bring hope to us, and it should actually give us a platform to consolidate, and we should indeed make sure that we move forward. And I agree that the 2009 presentation from Carmen is basically like it was yesterday. But again, it begins to also say that we quite comfortable now to say we know what the challenges are, and we need to really make sure that we deal with those challenges. And the shortcuts are not helping, and so is Bongani. He actually confirmed that, and the various speakers. So, Program Director, I'm hopeful that from my side, I will also be able to share the light in terms of what is it that we've done, what is it that we're doing, and what is it that needs to be done going forward. And indeed, there should be that kind of collaboration. There should be that kind of efforts to make sure that, much as it's difficult, we really need to make sure that that happens. And the issues the fact that we have Bongani from this side now, from the UN, it's also giving us hope, because he knows exactly what are the issues, and they are not necessarily easy, but those are the kind of things that we need to grapple with. I think for me, it's quite critical that we need to look at the timelines. that, that basically shows where we come from with the Tucson service centers, because they will continuously now begin to ground us as to how do we move forward. The roadmap of repositioning, because, from the issues that have been said in the morning, and this afternoon, there are challenges around the Tucson service centers, but it doesn't change the reality that it's one of the critical service delivery improvement mechanisms that are really, critical to our citizens, some of whom are reliant on that, especially, if we have to make sure that the issue of access and value for money, especially in the rural areas, becomes a reality. What are the key issues around repositioning of these Tucson service centers? And basically, the issues that one will be talking to will be reiterating what has been said, and also the typology of this and the proposed model of these Tucson service centers, and it will actually corroborate what Bongani has been saying. So for me, what is critical will be to say, now that we have these, how do we move forward? How do we partner? How do we sustain what we're having? The future provision of the Tucson service centers, because we need to sustain that kind of access. Whilst we are grappling with these kind of issues, colleagues, the citizens are maturing on the ground. Their expectations are getting more and more serious, and we have to account and make sure that we give them the service that they require. I will basically, colleagues, as program director has indicated, but and so is the access strategy is way back as 2004, where we really wanted to ground the Batupili revitalization program, where we wanted to make sure that there's facilitation of participation of citizens in the delivery of services, because we cannot just bring services to the people without engaging them. We need to make sure that within the context of Batupili, we come up with a citizen-centric kind of service. And we're also talking about the development of public service that has a strong citizen-centered culture. Chairperson, I don't know how do I take out this, because now I can't read. This thing is obstructing me. Okay, thank you. So basically, the main thing is, sorry about this. We also, in terms of the access strategy, we're talking about repackaging of service offering and the development of new models that are basically responsive to the maturity and the service delivery improvements going forward. How do we make sure that we provide information people? How do we make sure that we provide services to the people? And then how do we make sure that we achieve a greater collaboration, which has been a critical challenge since this morning, and it continues to be like that. As Lydia has indicated, even within your own department, the issue of silo way of doing things becomes a challenge. But now, with the maturity of the Tucson service centers, the issue of collaboration and integration and alignment and becomes even more critical, because the citizens really just want a one-stop shop in the true sense of the Tucson service centers, where they just want to come in and transgress with government and transact with government, and get whatever service that they require without lots of explanations. We also need to come up with a strategy to reposition, to repurpose and refocus the program. Basically, based on the lessons that come out of since 1999, there's a need for us to do that. But you don't necessarily just do it as a national department. That is where the issue is. You don't just do it as DPSA or DPME or COPTA or or PSC. You need to collaborate. We need to make sure that you work closely with the stakeholders. You also don't necessarily, do it alone as a provisional government. You need to do it in the true Batupili strategy, which aims at promoting integrated and seamless service delivery. And central to this repositioning, colleagues, is the whole of government or one government approach that is strengthened by collaboration between departments and other stakeholders. And as Bongani has indicated, stakeholders is not only government, but it's also private sector, it's also civil society, depending on what are the service delivery needs of the community at wherever Tucson Service Center is. But what is critical again is the concerns that we need to deal with, especially around the repositioning. that comes out of the proliferations of various types of service centers and related initiatives, that require greater synergy. Example of KZN, they've actually even differentiated those two service centers, and you realize that some of them need a different way or a different approach to make sure that they are being sustainable, because be it as whether we like it or not, is one of the service centers that are providing services within the communities. But lately we've seen a proliferation of that. We need to really make sure that we streamline them, we make sure that they are fit for purpose, we must make sure that they are really responding to the needs of the citizens. Colleagues, the reposition of Tucson service centers really commenced as way back as when we started with the Tucson service, I mean, in 2010, but in 2014-19 MTSF, government really elevated that to the MTSF, whereby there was a need to relook at these Tucson service centers, use the lessons that are coming out of that, and come up with a mechanism to reposition them. And the key issue at that time was to respond to the operational and the systemic challenges that was identified at that time, through various reviews. 209 PSC oversight was one of them, and one would argue that those oversights that were happening at that time, including even your parliamentary oversights, be it national or provincial or even local, was actually highlighting that there's a need to focus on external environment, on social, on technological, on economic, as well as policy enhancement. And these are the things that even our partnership with UN actually highlighted, that there's a need actually in terms of the repositioning to respond to the changing spatial realities, the socio-economic environment and demographic composition of the country. This includes, looking at the migration and settlement patterns, the youthful profile of the population, and also what is critical is to look at the evolving service delivery needs and expectations of the citizens. I cannot talk more about that. And the other thing was the increasing available powerful and user-friendly digital technologies that are there, that provide more choices to citizens, and citizens really want us to leverage on that for them to be able to access services. And one would hope that initiatives like that one in the Northern Cape will mature to that state where government could you can actually transact with government from your pocket. And what is also critical, as indicated, is the evolving service delivery models as well as modernization programs. This include the redesign and automation of processes of departments and agencies that provide services at the Tucson service centers. So it's quite critical that we look at the service delivery model that basically force integration, that force collaboration, that force that kind of alignment. And I like what Prof has indicated in the morning, that perhaps it should be part of consequence management. But this one of timeline, colleagues, is just to indicate to you where we come from as government, and these kind of activities that one has indicated to are quite critical to show, that the government was quite critical. It was a well thought kind of concept to come up with Tucson service centers, which started as MPCC at that time. And as indicated at that time, given, when you look at the broader transformation at that time, where there was, no services at all to especially the majority of the marginalized, the government at that time was even thinking that we should even have MPCC per district. But it has since evolved, and year in, year out, there was kind of a high-level commitment at the cabinet level. There was also the business plan that was, at that time, it was more led by GCIS, because at that time when the Tucson Service Center started, government wanted to provide information to the citizens. And as time went by, citizens were saying, we're now comfortable with information, but we want services now that needs to be provided. That's why the 2006 and 14 kind of business plan tried to come up with that kind of model where, services can be provided within the Tucson service centers. And the challenge with this kind of, initiatives was that they were not necessarily supported by the kind of requisite resources, requisite skills, that technology, the thinking was there, but, some of these things were lagging behind. And we were also partnering with stakeholders like your at that time, the GTEC, where, continuously government was trying to review these Tucson centers to make them to be responsive. So these timelines are really showcasing where we're coming from, what were the issues, what continue to be the issues, what was the response of government. But now I agree with the colleagues to say we shouldn't continue to talk about these issues. We should now begin to show that implementation, show that commitment. The repositioning started in 2014, 2015, where, as I've indicated, that it was part of the repositioning, where DPSA together with, those were center departments. It was DPSA, it was GCIS, it was DPW, it was National Treasury, it was COCTA, where, we were mandated to come up with an integrated strategy that will see the Tucson Service Center to the next level. I must say that the business case was done, colleagues, the funding model was done. The main thing now is to make sure that all those recommendations that came out of that are being implemented. And that is the things that one is grappling with now as we move forward. For an example, in 2017, we even reviewed the Tucson service model, which basically touched to the issues that Bongani was talking about, to say we shouldn't just look at bricks and mortar, we should look at the multiple channels that are responding to the environment on the ground. So the review is there, including the implementation plan in that regard. And we are, anyway, since 2018-19, we have been providing regular feedback politically at cabinet to begin to say this is where we are. And now what I'm saying, what is critical is to say we are engaging the different stakeholders from DPSA point of view, because we were saying, hello, we cannot just, be moving on and on and on, having talk shows after talk shows. We need to now, from policy perspective, look at the building blocks, look at the stakeholders that needs to be brought on board, and then engage from the political level. So at this stage, the ministers are engaging, Minister Coctas and National Treasury, and as well as even, the premiers, because this is a three-sphere kind of engagement. As you know, that at any point in time, the Tucson, you'll find it at the local sphere of government, but the issues that are affecting functionality of Tucson, cut across. There is national that is having some key role to play, provincial as long as local. So we are at a point where during 2020, 2021, now we really implementing the whole issues that we've been talking about. And I'm quite excited that even today's deliberations, as well as the issues that will be coming out of these meetings, will actually enhance the implementation plan that we move forward. And then we will have to find a way of fast-tracking implementation in that regard. The other critical thing is that we are now aligning this to, or linking it to government initiatives like the DDM. And it is within our space to make sure that whatever enablers based on different mandates that are required, for an example, from our side, the issues of norms and standards, as well as the frameworks that needs to make sure that these service centers are functional, is a thing that needs to happen as of yesterday. And just to indicate that, colleagues, the roadmap that was followed from our side, just for interest sake, we had a phase one where during 10, 14, and as well as 18, we did phase 1 around the feasibility study, where we looked at the options of, institutional model through the business case, and we did some consultations. I've already indicated the key stakeholders around that. We even consulted with the reports that came out of that, the studies that came out of that. We shared them broadly with different colleagues. We even shared that with cabinet, to a point where there was in principle approval of the way forward. Hence, in its second phase, based on cabinet decisions, we've now been busy with implementation. So phase 2 and phase 3 are running concurrently, in the sense that from our side, we're slowly but surely now supporting implementation. I think what is critical for the purpose of this debate again is that during the 2014-19, it was realized that the issue around the lead department became very, very fundamental, because there was realization that, much as initially the 207 centers were coordinated by GCIS, GCIS is not it's not necessarily within its mandate to make sure that services are being rendered and so forth. Their work is to make sure that they communicate and market government programs. That's why now the role of kind of 2-zone centers, the lead role of GCIS, was a bit minimized, but we didn't necessarily, they couldn't just relinquish their role, because we need to do that in a very systematic and transitional way. So they are now in transition to make sure that the lead department that has already been identified through all those work that has been done, through the lessons that are coming out of that, through the initiatives that are being done at this stage, it shows what the lead department should be. And we want to make sure that that kind of transition does take place. That's why GCIS is still there. And then from our side, phase 3, we're busy now with the legislative framework as part of the PEM Act, and it makes provision for the development of a framework that ensures monitoring, functionality, and governance and as well as funding of the service centers. Service centers in this instance is not only the 2-zone. Like colleagues have indicated, 2-zone is but one part of that. There are lots of service centers that are there. You've got the labor centers, you've got the seller centers, and so forth. And all of them are kind of having issues around governance, around integration, around coordination, and this service center framework, as provided by the PEM Act, we're quite hopeful that we'll make sure that the lessons that are being learned take into cognizance in responding to that. Colleagues, the challenges around special challenges still actually are in a way of reducing poverty and inequality. So it basically, this slide just make a point for the fact that indeed the 2-zone service centers are quite critical, but there are critical issues that you need to look at when you kind of come up with a sustainability model for the 2-zone service centers. You need to look at special challenges, we need to look at special planning, you need to look at issues of collaborative planning. So these are the kind of things that are quite critical as we move along. And there are some enabling acts that are there. The key issues that how do you make sure, for example, that you collaborate and with rural development, who are the key players around special planning and so forth, and also make sure that even the municipalities on where the 2-zone centers are located are actually empowered. Here, colleagues, I was just trying to indicate the kind of studies that we did with DPSA, where we basically just look at those 2-zone centers. 2-zone centers in the context of those centers that are providing, the 6-block model, where you have your SASA, or you have your labor, or you have your home affairs, social development, providing services within a center. So basically, these are kind of the spread that are there across the country. I thought this kind of map will be helpful, because for purpose of planning, it is important for us to look at how the 2-zone centers are being spread. And the other thing again The studies also kind of differentiated between the different types of Tucson service centers, which is also being confirmed lately now by the work of the UNDP, where we look at the Tucson centers as having a permanent structure where services of various departments are housed under one roof. Those services, or maybe those departments that have already cited, and this kind of model will continue to be there, especially in the rural areas where people really want to transact face-to-face with government. But you also have the kind of Tucson's where it's cluster services. They're already there, where you have permanent facilities of various departments, which are located in fairly close proximity to each other. So you like kind of, within maybe 2-kilometer radius, where you will have maybe home affairs, and then you'll have a primary healthcare clinic, you'll have education, you'll have social development. So we kind of said, we need to look at that, those kind of model as Tucson Service Center clusters, because already those key service departments are there. They are providing access to the citizens, and the citizens, they are able to to walk, a manageable kind of distance in terms of distance, and also in terms of the cost. And we're also looking at the cluster serves as a virtual Tucson service centers, and Tucson, yes, I've already indicated you'll have 3 minimum participating departments, and it will be quite interesting now to see the model or the different models within within the KZN, and how they have kind of differentiated that, which I think is quite critical. And in terms of our studies at that time, colleagues, in 2014, when we look at the clusters, when you look at the Tucson service centers, as alluded before, we were, short of something like 178 Tucson service centers, as well as, 165 kind of clusters, service clusters, for us to, to reach out to the at least to 80% of our intended recipients at that time. And we did share this with various provinces, because this 178 was even, we made provision per province, even per district, to say this is where we think there should be a Tucson service center, this is where we think there should be a Tucson service cluster. And basically, in terms of potential coverage, when you look at the numbers that I've alluded there, the coverage was to, potentially, in terms of the service clusters, would have covered something like 21 million. And in terms of Tucson service centers, would cover something like 17 million. And in terms of coverage across the country, it was going to be 44% of Tucson's in terms of coverage, as well as 56% of service clusters. And in general, you would have something like the total coverage is somewhere there, over something like 38 million coverage of the population. So basically, if you can have that kind of spread, indeed, I would imagine that there will be a satisfaction because citizens will be able to receive services in one way or another. There will also be a little bit of increased trust in government in delivery in their provinces. And what are the key considerations, colleagues, which I think are critical for repositioning of the Tucson service centers? Most of them have been, emphasized by the previous presenters. We need to have a clear mandate. The clear mandate that, to carry out the national coordination function, that is not necessarily, that is not ambiguous, and that is backed by devoted financial and human resources, as well as the applicable systems and ICT. So basically, this is what we have come up with as part of the repositioning, is part of what we've shared with Cabinet, is what Cabinet has approved. Ours is just to implement. The regulatory framework is quite critical around that, which serves as a foundation for coordination, funding, and operations. So basically, All that the colleagues are interested in is enabling framework, enabling legislative framework, and the PEM Act is really clear in that regard. All that we need to do as DPSA, we're hopeful that at some point we'll be able to transfer the Maponya Tucson service, Eben Tucson, to either to the National Department of COCTA or the local, to a point where we will be able to make sure that we fast track the regulatory framework. At this stage, we are kind of having so many distractions, especially that we want to make sure that that model is being sustained. There are lots of lessons that are coming out of that. And then there should be clear accountability. That has been indicated by the colleagues. The buck must stop somewhere. There should be a single institution that must be responsible for the overall coordination of the program. And as a result of that, colleagues, during those studies, we came up with we came up with 6 principles to look at the institutional options that can actually have that kind of clear accountability, that can have the clear mandate. We were having 6 principles where we're saying, number 1, that department, there should be a national coordinating institution that should have mandate and a capacity to carry out the range of functions that are being identified. Number 2, the national coordinating institution should have the authority and capacity to resolve the challenges identified in the situation analysis and transforming of the Tucson program. And then number 3, the national coordination institution should have a footprint and facilitates its engagement with other spheres of government involved in the Tucson Service Center. That institution should have or should be given the AGR nature of Tucson centers. It should have that. And then the National Coordinating Institution should have mandate in the area of IGR. That institution, ideally, National Coordinating Institution should have provincial counterparts that mirror in its terms of mandate in the provision spheres of government. This facilitates a clear line of sight in planning, budgeting for Tucson centers. Lastly, that National Coordinating Institution must have an identifiable, dedicated budget to carry out the coordination function of the Tucson Service Center. So we did take that to Cabinet, and Cabinet did agree to that. And I'm sure without even saying the name of that institution is quite clear, ladies and gentlemen, to say which one has got the IGR function, the footprint at municipalities, the budget, and so forth. I didn't say it, you said it. And then there should also be a way to resolve disputes, because as Bongani has indicated, in some of these centers, have been vacated because there was no agreement. In some instances, it's the assets. In some instances, it's land issues. Especially where they are traditional, in the traditional affairs kind of space. So the absence of dispute resolution mechanisms allows problems, especially around the governance, the funding, and service delivery, to go unresolved and undermine the sustainability of the program. That is very critical. There should be effective protocols for dispute resolution that should be in place across the 3 spheres to enable speedy recovery, speedy and timely interventions, and should be popularized and shared between all stakeholders, partners, as well as communities. It doesn't help for me and you to know about these resolution mechanisms without the other critical stakeholders, being the know-how of, in the know about these and how to implement those, or how those are being implemented. And these developments and institutionalization of complaints frameworks, basically this will also, strengthen the complaints management framework, which is part of Batopili. And I must say that most of the problems that are being there, colleagues, are around complaints. So if we cannot come up with a mechanism and a resolution mechanisms that will make sure that we deal with those complaints, the Tucson service centers will not necessarily be sustainable. There should be sound planning for government services, which should be done from the perspectives of the citizens. And I think that's what UNDP has actually emphasized. You don't want to do it for yourselves. you need to do that from the side lens of the citizens. You must take into account the national provincial and local special planning framework, and the basket of services that are required there should be driven from the perspective of the citizens. Let's not go there with what we think the citizens want, but let's engage the citizens around that. And we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We shouldn't come up with other tools within the, instruments like the IDPs and so forth. How do we strengthen that? How do we integrate with that to make sure that we strengthen them? And then the Tucson Service Centers becomes a mechanism in that regard. And I would imagine that that's why even the DDM, we really want to make sure that we ground the Tucson Service Centers, within that model. Funding model, colleagues, is very, very critical. And we did actually, together with National Treasury, assisted by GTEC, undertook a financial analysis study, and basically the resolution thereof are still part of the ongoing negotiations and so forth, and engagements to make sure that whatever implementation that comes out of that are kind of sustainable. But for the purpose of this meeting, it's quite important that to know that there is, or there was a well thought of kind of work that was being undertaken, and implementation is taking place. That study took into account the past and present revenue expenditure, and it sampled Tucson centers, those that are dysfunctional, others that are functional, and those with potential. I must say that Maponya Tucson Service Center, with a success rate of almost 100% of cost recovery, was also part of that. And out of that study, there were some options that were actually were suggested in terms of how do we, come up with funding options that may be sustainable going forward. The options that were suggested, for an example, it was utilizing of the grant. Supposedly, COPTA is the national department, and then they have footprint on the ground, and there are some grants around that. There could be a grant that can be made available, and number two, there could be a cost recovery of some sort, where the departments that are within the center are actually, there's a lead department that actually do all the procurements and so forth, and recover the cost from other departments, which is the model that is being applied at Maponya. Or there could be a top slice of some sort that is being explored. So the funding model is something that is very much urgent, that is being fast-tracked, and we are working with the relevant departments in that regard. And then the fit-for-purpose infrastructure issues around the ICT, we've spoken about that it's an enabler, and at this stage is hindering implementation at the ground. And we really want to make sure that, or maybe the warning is that, the centers that cannot meet infrastructure and ICT requirements of anchor departments are likely not to attract and retain that. And indeed, the departments that have been modernizing, like the Home Affairs, some of them have moved out of the center, not because access to citizens is an issue, but mainly because ICT infrastructure is not maturing at the level at which they are modernizing. The issues of the smart ID card, they had to move out of those centers, some of those centers, mainly because of ICT infrastructure. And SASA is the same example. But now the disadvantage in this regard, colleagues, is that the very citizens that you want to bring services to, now we are taking away those services. And then if you can see, some of these services now are now closer to towns where there's connectivity, and then now the whole issue that we're trying to deal with when it comes to the access strategy are actually now all those gains are falling away, whereby citizens are now having to travel so many kilometers and to go and get services from government. But it also provides frustration even to the very public servants that are the machinery of government, because you can imagine Some of them, they went to the Tucson service centers, because it's closer to their homes and so forth. Some of them, they're just passionate, they want to service their communities. And now we have to take them away from where the communities are, and that's the challenge. Organizational culture in those Tucson service centers is quite critical, where we need to make sure that it looks to issues of behavior, flexibility, innovation, and so forth. And because of the challenges that are there, the organizational culture is such that, I will just say it's unbattlable. And, the whole issue of courtesy, the whole issue of, Ubuntu becomes an issue because there's no lead department, there's no coordination, there's no, everybody is just there for him or herself. So we need to deal with the issue of organizational culture that brings public service together, where we say we're doing it the Tucson service way, and by putting people as citizens first. Monitoring and evaluation, as being alluded to, is quite critical, where, we should be able to put in place all those measures that, continuously monitor how we do our things and take into account also the reports or the reviews on regular basis, so that, there's continuous improvement in the work that we're doing. So what we've seen is that there are lots of oversight visits that are happening there. There are lots of reviews that are coming out of that. We receive the reports, and even within the context of their work, there's monitoring that is happening, but we don't necessarily use the lessons that are coming out of that to improve how the Tucson Service Center operate. Political support is quite critical, and I don't want to overemphasize that. We really need that. Knowledge management and learning. This is a learning organization, and we should be able to see how we move from 1991 to 2021, not only as selective people, but all of us, including those that are at the Tucson service centers. There should be, there has to be passionate, there should be professionalism, there should be some lessons that are coming out of that, and people should be, like the KZN as well as Northern Cape, be pride in sharing those kind of knowledge that are coming out of those Tucson service centers. Lastly, what is critical now, Chairperson, is the whole issue of the evolution and coalition of the Tucson service delivery model, where we're looking at clustering of facilities of various departments. I've already alluded to that. That's a model that we need to look at. Establishment of government prisons in priority areas. Public Works is already doing that. And then coordinating deployment of mobile services, because there are certain areas where, you cannot just reach out those places with mobile. But it shouldn't happen by accident. It should be part of planning. We should consciously say that for this kind of area, this is the kind of Tucson that is required. But we also want there's greater emphasis on partnerships, and we're hopeful that the examples of COCTA and UNDP will take us to the next level, and we should be able to sustain those kind of relationships. The model must keep abreast with the developing service delivery models of departments, adoption of multi-service channels, which include partnership and use of ICT. And indeed, the challenge with the Tucson service centers, especially the cellularization of that, is such that when the other department, improve on its service delivery model, others are lagging behind. But it's mainly because we are operating in silos. So if we adopt a single service delivery model that is responsive to all of us that are providing services there, it will actually bring even satisfaction to the public services themselves. A network-based approach for the provision of various types of sizes of Tucson service centers. We've already spoken to clusters. We've already spoken to the Tucson service centers. This is the example that was shared by my colleague from the Northern Cape, where we've actually just differentiated between the different types of Tucson, where a Tucson service center, it can be a metro, it can be large, it can be small. So basically, you just need to do your homework and begin to come up with a model that is, or the size or the kind of Tucson that is responsive to your area. There can be clusters again in the Tucson service centers, or we can have satellites, or we can have mobile, and the others you can actually outreach. The outreach are not a political issue, colleagues. It's about going out to the communities and go and get exactly what the issues are there that they are crying about, and come back and engage with the relevant stakeholders to make sure that you respond to the issues raised by the communities. That's one of the model that we think that it really needs to be strengthened going forward. In terms of the future, we are looking at prioritizing investment in service delivery infrastructure as set out in the National Development Framework. And the key consideration should be around population demand for service-based. We can use the stats of SA. There are other data that is there that we can utilize. And then we should also look at the migration trends as well as human settlement patterns. These issues are quite critical, colleagues. DPSA did the accessibility studies, and we continue to even, we shared that with different departments, with different provinces, and we continue to update that periodically, basically every 2 years. And then there should also be priorities that are set out in the long-term infrastructure development of plans and infrastructure, facility infrastructure requirements and standards of departments, because like we indicated, if you don't respond to those departments by providing the requisite infrastructure, they will definitely just walk out of the centers. And who will suffer? It will be the citizens, and it will lead to dissatisfaction and less trust in government. Possible funding and capacity constraints needs to be dealt with through a sustainable funding model. I've already alluded to that. And then the other thing, again, we need to prioritize investment in service delivery infrastructure. I've already. So this is just one slide that I thought I need to share with you, colleagues, just to indicate that in terms of how we envisage in this, at the national level, we will be having a national coordinating institution. In this instance, everything is guiding to COCTA, and that's what we're engaging with COCTA in that regard. And one is quite excited now that even the initiatives of COCTA, like the DDM, are actually leveraging on Tucson service centers. And all that we need to do is to make sure that we work together, provide that kind of thought leadership, provide enabling conditions, all of us that are critical in that regard. So role clarification is quite critical in that regard. And then the National Coordinating Institution will also look at issues of funding, administering funding mechanisms, issues of subsidies and so forth, depending on the kind of funding model we settled for going forward. And then in terms of provincial coordinating, there should be that provincial coordinating department, and ideally, or not ideally, basically those Tucson service centers that are being led by COCTA at the provincial level are actually operating better and effectively than the others. There are those that are being led by the Office of the Premier. They are, also, by virtue of the mandate of the Office of the Premier operating, but we think that in terms of COCTA, because they also have a close proximity to the municipalities where the Tucson resides, are actually managed better. And we're saying that at that level, there will be oversight of integrated service delivery centers, as well as mechanisms within the province to really make sure that the Tucson service centers, whichever model that you'll come up with, are being sustained. At the municipal level, we're looking at establishing, the role thereof will be establishment of resources and maintaining of the integrated service center. That integration, that alignment will be happening at that level, where we make sure that because the Tucson are at the municipal level, all those service departments are actually having something that is bringing them together and making sure that the issues around the funds that are usually a challenge in the service center, based on the model, becomes issues of the past, and this will be done in accordance with national and provincial funding mechanism. So you can see that governance arrangement from national, provincial, municipality, we kind of thought that through, and it can be tweaked here and there. And we're not saying it should evolve with the time as the Tucson service centers matured. And then lastly, it's at the level where now we are at the service center level, where there should be integrated way of doing things, where the service center manager should be the glue around that, should be putting together all those governance arrangements within the center, making sure that there is structures that pull together the people that are at the level, the supervisors and so forth. They discuss issues of operations at the center. They discuss issues like the complaints and so forth. They even come up with improvements that needs to be done based on what the citizens want at that level. So,
Hello, sorry, Ms. Mutalani. We're running out of time, so I wanted to check how many more slides you have there. This is the last one. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So in making final decisions on the locations of the tuition centers, consideration should be be given to service delivery, preferences of communities and local stakeholders. We need to complete an accurate geospatial service information on tuition service centers and facilities of stakeholders to ensure that there's integration in infrastructure as well, that includes planning. The DPSA and GCIS needs to basically continuously provide an update at cabinet and at various levels to make sure that they work closely with all the critical roles stakeholders to make sure that the relocation of the tuition service centers, including that one of Maponya, is realized. And then the framework for establishment, promotion, and maintenance of service centers, as provided by the PEM Act, should be finalized, as an enabling instrument by the DPSA. Thank you very much and happy Public Service Month.
Very much, Memo Talani, for the presentation. Just one comment. With the numbers that you have for your clusters and TSCs, you may have to revise them because we are now almost 60 million in South Africa. So you are getting further and further away from the 50% point. You may have to revise that because the population is growing in the meantime. Without wasting any more time, we will take a presentation from Mr. Temba Forse, I believe from COCTA, to give us a presentation on reimagining TSC as a strategic implementation mechanism for the DDM. Over to you, Tate Forse. I hope you'll give me that presentation in about 20 minutes so that we can go to the rapporteur to come and do a summary and then we close. We're supposed to close at 1, but we are running late. Thank you.
No, thanks, Program Director. I will give you the presentation in less than 20 minutes. So it's a very short presentation, and I think the colleagues or previous presenters have covered a lot of the issues, Bongani and Veronica, and even the previous session. Can I request that maybe Natasha or someone who can fly to my presentation? I'm struggling here to flight it on my side. Yeah, thanks very much. You can just put it on the, yes. And good afternoon to all the attendees, both physically and those that are in the virtual session. And recognizing, of course, your capacities from the organizations you're coming from. And then to thank the Program Director the opportunity for us to present on the DDM. The topic was reimagining Tusong centers as a strategic implementation mechanism for the DDM. We can move to the next slide. I think what we'll do, because a number of issues have already been covered, I'm not going to spend time on the challenges. I think they've been explained quite extensively. So I'll focus more, spend some time on the DDM, what it's trying to achieve, and then look at what are some of the opportunities then for alignment with the DDM. We can move to the next one. So overall, when Cabinet approved the DDM in 2019, these are the objectives that were articulated in the concept note, which overall is about how do we introduce integrated planning, spatial budgeting, and coherent sort of government, which will address the challenges that have been there for the past 25 years in terms of the silos, fragmentation, and duplication in how government, the three spheres of government operate. And also how we ensure that government, as it continues to lend and resources from the various spheres, but also stakeholders outside of government. So I'm not going to go through all the objectives as set out there, but these are clear objectives that informs the new approach of the DDM. If we move to the next slide, the key objective really of why do we need DDM, it sets out a clear sort of common vision for the country, which will be then broken down into the needs and opportunities of the 52 spaces, geographic spaces. And those 52 spaces, it's your 44 district municipalities plus the 8 metropolitan municipalities. And this is basically the impact zones, if you like, where we would then measure all of government programs and budgets and clear commitments on how each sphere is contributing to the developmental agenda of the country. So the idea is that this approach will also provide us with a clear accountability framework where we'll be able then to track these commitments and budgets and programs that are made by the spheres, including stakeholders outside of government. And overall, the DDM, it's not just a new approach, it is predicated on Chapter 3 of the Constitution in terms of cooperative governance. And this is what has been elusive for the past 25 years. It's been very difficult for us to integrate and provide a coherent government for the Republic because of the entrenched practices of silos and so on. If you move to the next slide. So what the DDM does, it introduces really a new paradigm and a discipline in how we plan, budget, and implement. So firstly, it recognizes the district geographic space as the point of achieving these developmental outcomes and this integration. And these district spaces also provide us with a baseline or a unit of analysis that should inform how the other spheres are planning and responding to the challenges on the ground. So if you take the recent sort of challenges in terms of the pandemic, but also the state of our economy, we have seen the structures that have been established across the three spheres, which are coordinating government response to COVID, but also to the GBV sort of challenges. And it has provided a more coherent approach in how government is actually responding to these challenges. So fundamentally, it provides us with a baseline on how we can understand the extent of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in a particular geographic space. And the next slide, I think we'll be able to explain it much better. So if you look at this slide, overall, we're guided by the National Development Plan, which sets out a long-term vision for the country, and also the National Special Development Perspective. These are the two sort of key national policies or frameworks at the apex of government that informs all of government. So at the national level, you have then your MTSF, which must express those clear commitments. At the provincial level, you'll have provincial growth and development strategies. At the municipal level, you have your IDPs. And all of these plans are meant to translate those national goals into specific mandates that each of these spheres will implement. And all of these would be expressed in the APPs of national and provincial departments. at the municipal level, your SDBIBs would be then an equivalent of an APP, which then articulates clear budget commitments that are aligned to those priorities. So what the DDM now you can stay on that slide. What the DDM does, it then provides that those district development plans must be expressed in what we call a one plan, district one plan, which will be an expression of all of government in that district. So these plans, the integration of the national, provincial, and the municipal plans must then find expression in the one plan. The one plan is informed, of course, by a detailed analysis of the state of development of that district, which is through the district profile. The extent of poverty, the extent of unemployment, challenges of the youth, crime, the state of health of that district. So that profile is a very comprehensive profile about the state of that district. And the idea is that all of these plans from the other spheres must then demonstrate clear commitments of how they are responding to those challenges. Which must then reflect in the one plan how, as three spheres, will work in an integrated way to then demonstrate coherence of government response to economic growth challenges, to challenges of unemployment. How do we provide for infrastructure in this district? I've put the issue of a two-song also there because I thought it's important then the physical manifestation of how government working in unison and seamlessly can find expression physically in a particular space in terms of the integrated provision of services, which must express how all of government is working in an integrated way. So these one plans are one plans which articulate clear priorities guided by the framework of the one plan, which will deal with issues of economic positioning, issues of social transformation, issues, infrastructure needs, and all of these spatial transformation issues. All of these, if you're talking about the role of two-song centers, must then be able to articulate at a local level how these services of government of the three spheres are responding to the needs of these districts. And the profile is a profile which must also inform the work that two-song centers does, because the profile will give an understanding of what is the extent of the problem in each of these districts and where the pressure points and the needs are, and how you then organize services of government to respond. It's more spatially targeted. It responds to the realities on the ground in terms of the services. So if I make an example, if you take the unemployment, youth unemployment challenge in OR Town, out of when we started in 2019 working with States SA, out of the 32 sort of percent of unemployment, almost 80% of that is the youth under the age of 34. And the majority only have primary education level. So that's the challenge that you have of the youth. You have high levels of violence against women, rape, and so on. It gives you a sense of what the problems are. And in relation to the one plan, there will be plans on how we respond, catalytic interventions that are identified on how to respond to those issues. But at a two-song center level, it means they also need to have the same understanding of this profile to an extent that they're able to redirect and organize services of government to respond to that reality. Because that's the needs or the pressure points. I'm just making examples of those, but issues of infrastructure, there's challenges also in relation to that. The next slide, I'm not going to really spend time. I think Bongani and you've covered this adequately. Some of the existing challenges with the work that the UN has done. So we can skip this one. And the next slide also just introduces the partnership that we've established with the UN. And that partnership is focusing on 3 areas: unlocking the economic value chains, social transformation, and the service delivery enhancement. The service delivery enhancement is the one that focuses then on your Tusong centers. The social transformation focuses on the Tutuzela centers. Unlocking the economic value chain is how you create economic opportunities at the community level and support to small and medium sort of businesses, taking advantage of all the value chains at a local level and build community-based sort of economic activities. So we've signed this MOU with the UN, and I think the work that Mogani presented is part of this collaboration with the UN. You can move to the next slide. This slide, I think the KZN colleagues have presented on their model. So there are good practices already in the country which we must build on, where there's clear demonstration of how agile and more proactive the province is in terms of taking this work seriously and how they have organized themselves. So we need to draw from these good lessons without going through the slide. And then maybe you can move to the next one. Yeah, this is my last slide, and I will spend some time here. I think the issue of reimagining and how we position the Tusong centers, it must take a special sort of approach, geographic special approach to understanding the needs and challenges in each of these areas, and how the concentration of the services that are provided by various sectors is coordinated at a local level. So you have departments, national departments that have footprint at the district level. You'll also have provincial departments of the same departments that have concurrent functions, also having sort of footprint in that district. And there are those national exclusive functions also that have footprint in the same district. And then in the context of the DDM, we have established in the 3 pilot sites what we refer to as district hubs. These district hubs, they are meant to be the central point of coordination of all these various departments that are operating in that particular district. So the commitments, budget commitments, and all the work that these departments are doing in that district are already expressed in the one plan. And the work of government in that district is centrally coordinated through the one plan, which expresses also clear budget commitments. So in that context, you want then the same sort of services that these departments are providing, how these are expressed in the provision, direct provision of services to citizens. There must be a clear relationship between those hubs and the Tusong centers in terms of the services that the government is providing to this. And that's the opportunity for the alignment in terms of the one plans and how we coordinate government as a whole. It also addresses the issue of silos, because if there's clear commitment already by these departments who are in that district, they should also then, in the context of the services they are providing, be coordinated also centrally through these Tusong centers, but also spatially mapped in terms of where the needs are, without just looking at one physical center, but how you spread yourself to cover the district. Well, there are vast districts with many local municipalities and so on. So you need to look at how you then position yourself in a more differentiated way to cover all those areas. I think the key issues, as I've said, it's the issue of integrated provision of services, the issue of enabling technology. It's an issue that has been raised sharply by the colleague from Northern Cape. I think we must also begin to invest in this area in terms of how services of government are centrally provided, whether we're talking e-governance. There are countries that have done a lot of work already on e-governance that we can draw from. There's work that was started also in the country around e-governance in terms of the services, whether it's IDs, it's licensing, the municipal services that are provided, how all of these in a more sort of use enabling technologies to ensure that we provide effective services to citizens. But of course, this must recognize the spatial differences of your urban areas, rural areas, and what support needs to be provided to those areas in a more sort of integrated and focused way. I think the other point which I've already made, it's about then the alignment of the District 1 plans and these district hubs. So at this moment, we have all the 3 pilot sites have developed their 1 plans. Currently, the districts and working with the provinces are finalizing their 1 plans. The target is that by end of this month, September actually, we should have concluded all these 1 plans. The 1 plans can only be an effective instrument of driving integrated development if it expresses clear commitment of the various spheres and stakeholders outside of government. In this regard, we are working with DPME to look at how the issue of the planning frameworks, it becomes compulsory also for sectors when they develop their APPs to actually express them geographically and spatially to the 52 spaces in relation to what are they responding to. Also Treasury, we're looking at the issues of spatial budgeting so that it becomes part of the frameworks that guides the whole planning and budgeting process. And I think the point that was raised also by Commissioner again of how then do you utilize performance agreements to strengthen this. Well, the reality is that to deal with silos and fragmentation, you need to deliberately introduce instruments and systems that are targeted at changing behavior and culture in the system. And then there must be consequence management on how we actually deal with the effectively with silos and fragmentation. So those 2 areas, it's meant to really ensure that the 1 plans reflect all of government, but we can also use it as an accountability framework for holding sectors accountable. The collaboration with the district hubs, we are rolling out, we've done the 3 in the pilot site, we'll be rolling out in the 23 Water Services Authority this current financial year. And then we'll, in the outer years, we'll look at how we spread it to the remaining districts. And I think this is where we'll need to look at how we work closely with the PSA and all the critical stakeholders in terms of how the Tusong centers expresses that integrated work of government, which is expressed in the 1 plans in that particular district, and what kind of services should be provided. So this should not just be looked at just as a physical sort of manifestation of this integrated government, but it must, the Tusong centers must be more proactive in responding to the needs and challenges of each of these districts. The information is available, so it's critical that the Tusong Center or the managers, when we set norms and standards on what they need to do, We also accommodate issues of how do we generate credible data and information in terms of the demographics, but also just the state of development of that area. And this will assist in terms of how that center responds to the realities and ensure that we respond to the needs of communities in these areas. So the issue of integrated planning, spatial budgeting, and coherent implementation, it becomes then an element that can be expressed physically through the two song centers. And that's how we achieve the objectives of the DDM through these two song centers. But it requires that we must invest in the steps before we talk about how all these services come together in the two song centers. So we must deal effectively with the silos in the planning processes to an extent that when we then talk services that are provided in the two song centers, already that integration has already happened, the clear budget commitments, and also it's not the department that is responsible for two song centers to then follow up on the specific departments, but in their commitment to the one plan, there's also clear commitment of what services they must provide in the two song centers. Chair, I thought those would be the sort of key points one would want to emphasize just in the contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much.
And it's starting to take its toll on all of us. Without waste of time, I'll call Ms. Pillay to come and do a very short piece on key points that has come out of today's engagement. Over to you. I'm kidding.
To share his screen shortly. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen present in person and those joining virtually. Allow me to stand on the shoulders of previous speakers and say all protocols observed. My name is Krivani Pillay and I'm the Partnerships Officer in the Office of the UN Resident Coordinator, Ms. Nados Bekele Thomas, and it's my task to briefly summarize the day and focus on the next steps following this morning's dialogue. As we all know, the white paper on transforming public service delivery is about building a public service capable of meeting the challenge of improving the delivery of public services to the citizens of South Africa. In other words, a citizen-centric, people-centered public service that is seamless and responsive. What we heard in this morning's dialogue focused on integrated frontline service delivery improvement in support of the District Development Model, or DDM, as part of why we're gathered here, which is Public Service Month, for us to really discuss practical resolutions that can be followed up to influence policy development on frontline service deliveries. The Deputy Minister for Public Service and Administration, Dr. Chana Philane Majake, set the tone for the dialogue today, highlighting the successes and challenges of public service, laying bare what faces public administration and governance, and talked about value aspect, which is serving people with empathy and Ubuntu, serving people with Batapili principles and the Public Service Charter. The Deputy Minister talked about the role of public service in this endeavor to serve the community, to provide impartial, fair, and equitable services, to demonstrate transparency through timely, accessible, and accurate information, and to link peoples with service, trust, more than just courtesy and cues. We need to live out the Batapile principles. Throughout the morning, there's been a lot of overlap between all our speakers. We've heard that we come together time and time again, but we need to honor those gatherings and not have it be a repetitive session. How do we build a capable developmental state? In doing so, like Dr. Somadoda Fikeni said, we must revisit the principles of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Whilst the sector has made incredible strides, there's still much to be done. We need to build partnerships. We need to demonstrate the whole of society approach between government, civil society, private sector. We need to adequately be resourced from financial resources to human resources to IT infrastructure. So what we've heard today and seen today are some of the challenges. For example, some of the challenges highlighted are part-time or scheduled availability of departments at the Tusong centers due to staff shortages. Lack of funds was one of the reasons for non-service. Increased working hours. Management of the TSCs are currently diverse due to a lack of necessary frameworks, different management structures. So what are the recommendations across all of the various speakers that we've been hearing this morning? Addressing infrastructural challenges, strengthening efforts to improve accessibility, improve overall management of the TSCs, increase monitoring and evaluation. Tusong Service Center managers should be appointed and capacitated, the National Department assigned to the responsibility to coordinate these centers to ensure that the managers who are appointed are provided with clear job descriptions. We need to see frameworks which promote uniformity, integrated service delivery. We need to break down silos, exactly what the DDG had just mentioned. We need to involve all spheres of government in the TSCs. And it's important that the relevant intersectoral steering committees promote the involvement of each of the levels in the TSCs. I'm going to kindly ask my colleague, Evan, to please share his screen of some of the next steps that we have put together with support of colleagues from UNDP. And this will then be shared with everybody and hopefully be endorsed at this meeting on the next steps forward. I will continue in the event of saving time. So one of the, it's been divided into three sections, a short-term or urgent response plan, a medium-term, and of course a long-term. So on the short term, which is, we could consider about the first 6 months, is reframe and reconceptualize the Tusong centers, working toward an integrated, holistic, multi-channel access strategy and program. So there's discernible narrative that narrowly frames and conceptualizes the Tusong service centers as standalone service delivery initiatives, instead of the Tusong centers being seen as an integral part of a much broader, holistic, integrated, multi-channel ecosystem. We need to have an overarching legislative framework and policy. In the absence of legislation, or a governance framework on the specific ministry and department responsible and accountable for the establishment and efficient and effective performance of the TSCs. We need an interim governance MOA, a memorandum of agreement, which must include urgent financial injection, a sustainable funding model, as you heard from previous speakers. The TSC forum and integration into existing Batapile forums. If you look in the chat group, that's something that has also been mentioned by some of the participants on the virtual chat. That Batapile plays a critical transversal role in terms of service delivery across the public service, and the current prevailing institutional culture in government and TSCs in particular is not customer-centric. One of the other things is capacity building of center managers and sector departments, infrastructure repair and maintenance, and of course, breaking silos. Suggestions for medium-term responses include reimagining TSCs, an organizational review, design and turnaround, digitization and modernization, institutionalized dedicated unit at national level, change management and culture reorientation, and perhaps a flagship TSC for proof of concept. And reimagining organizational review, design, and turnaround. What we find is we've got all the elements in place. It's a matter of methodology, which we would like to emphasize. And in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard this morning a whole host of recommendations made from the various sectors. We've seen best case practices from bridging the digital divide to cases where coordination and planning works. We've also seen that in order to have success, we must address things like political will, sponsorship, and championship. We must leverage on private-public partnerships. We need to also include budgeting and financing, institutional capacitation, efficiency, and effective partner municipalities. And we've heard from various stakeholders the assessments done on Tusong centers. This program has made significant contributions to accelerating service delivery. However, we've heard from this morning's dialogue that there are challenges in coordinating the program and ensuring that services at TSCs are rendered in an integrated manner. A concern in this regard is that there's no single department that ensures standardization and uniformity of operations and provides operational frameworks in this regard. The next steps are if all relevant departments get into a room and co-create a model that addresses the shortcomings that have been reflected today. I'd like to quote one of our guests in the call, who is David Moeketsi, who at 1:45 said, "There's been a long-standing discussion going into the National Batapile Forum regarding the monitoring and evaluation of service delivery reports presenting during the forum's meetings. This process could complement the implementation of district service delivery model, and it's important that the DPSA, DPME, and COCTA synergize their efforts towards ensuring that the Tusong service centers are effectively operational." Like I said, often we have the right ingredients for implementation, but the methodology may be problematic. It's clear that those participating in this dialogue this morning are committed to people first. Now it's up to the co-creation session that we hope will follow to ensure that this doesn't become archived as another talk shop, and that we can begin to collaborate and co-create solutions to ensure acceptable service levels as soon as possible and ensuring that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pillay, for summarizing very, very well. I think you did a brilliant job in terms of capturing the proceedings of today. At this juncture, I don't know if there are any questions from the screen. There's no other questions, unless if technical, there are questions that are coming out. There are none. In terms of going forward, I'm not sure if there are the panel members who want to make just 30 seconds last comments, including those that are connected virtually, so that we can close. We can start with Bongani.
Thanks, Program Director. No, I think basically, mine basically, I think really is just to reinforce everything that has basically been, I think, been said. And I was actually thinking that there is a famous expression that says, never let the search for the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So I think we have the ingredients, I think, to actually to reposition, to resuscitate, to revive these Tusong centers. And I think we're quite very privileged and lucky that we've managed to get all key role players to be part of this session. And I think maybe just to indicate and to say that, to confirm actually that the UN in South Africa, the UN family, stands ready to support all the efforts to make sure that we really all of us collectively put our hands on the deck and make sure that we improve services and make sure that everybody has access to services, especially those people in the far-flung areas. As you said, that Tusong centers will be but one of the mechanisms, but we are ready, we stand ready, I think, to facilitate any other exploration of other mechanisms to improve service delivery, including facilitating any required knowledge exchanges and learnings from elsewhere, in terms of assisting the country to actually to move forward. And I think what we've actually done, based on the summary that was given by Krivani, I think we will then get into a process. Perhaps we can consider program director, to have a small team that is really going to be looking at those next steps and actually work out a very detailed plan in terms of what are the key issues, allocate responsibilities, and basically set sort of a timeline. We are asked by our own principal in the UN that let's make sure that this is not another talk shop, something concrete comes out of that. So we stand ready to work. We've already been involved actually in preparation to this dialogue and throughout the Public Service Month, with TPSA, PSC, COCTA, GSIS, and other stakeholders. So I think under the leadership of the TPSA, I think let's make sure that in the next 7 days, in the next 7 days, that's our language in the UN. In the next 7 days, we basically put together a concrete plan so that we can all go back and report to our principal. But I think more importantly, we are accountable to the citizens, so that to say that out of this dialogue during Public Service Month 2021, it was a game changer. Basically. So I think we stand ready to support you. So I think at DPSA you have 7 days to actually to convene all of us to begin to work on this plan, and we will submit it to our respective principal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that didn't come from me as the program director. Mr. Fossey, any last words from your side?
No, not really, Chair. Just to say that we're also ready to work with the PA.
Okay.
We're also part of that process. Thanks.
I'm not going to ask Veronica to say anything because the marching orders have been given. Between Ms. Mutalanile, Mamello, I'm not sure whose head is on the block here. Both of your heads are on the block. That within 7 days, let this dialogue be a game changer. We are known for talking as government, but this time around, I think with the next Public Service Month event, we will be really reporting on progress that we achieved since we met today. What time is it now? I'm standing between you and lunch. I see the program director has also been given the role of giving closing remarks and also, vote of thanks. I will not go into closing remarks because I think Krivani did a very good job there. But I want to thank all the speakers that were here today. We know we took time from your busy diaries. I should have started with my boss first, the Deputy Minister, who found time to come and spend some time with us here. We thank her in absentia. We thank UNDP as a partner. I think I need to raise that. UNDP South Africa has been supporting a lot of programs of government, and we really do appreciate. I hope the message will get back to the big boss that we really appreciate what the UNDP is investing in South Africa in this regard. Thanks to the DPSA team, the people behind the Public Service Month, running around, making sure that all these dialogues and engagements are happening. Thank you so much. To the technical team as well, thank you for your support. I'm told with children, technology, and pets, you can never be sure. So don't feel bad that things do go wrong sometimes. there's no perfect plan when it comes to, especially events and logistics. You think you've got everything done correctly, and then boom, the internet decides to go down, and you have to restart. But the issues about how you manage these disruptions, and I think as a team, you did very, very well. I'm not sure who's gonna thank me, but I thank myself for being here on behalf of the DPSA, for covering for the DG who couldn't be here today. I hope to all the people who connected virtually, thank you so much for staying online. It really feels very strange if you don't have a full audience. You think you are talking to just a few people. That's why you see our eyes going to where the people are, because you want some, confirmation that you are not talking to yourself. Unfortunately, it's because of COVID that we find ourselves in this situation. But thank you so much, and that will then be the end of the dialogue. We hope you log in for the closing tomorrow. I don't have the details, but I know there is a closing session tomorrow to mark, not tomorrow, on the 30th. That's the last day of the Public Service Month celebration. I thank you.